I am here. Is anybody else? I have. I have forgotten that today is a public holiday in many places. So I hope that it won't be only me talking to myself as we progress. So if somebody's here, please write into the chat, say hi. And if it's just me, I'll start anyway, because this will be recorded and other people can watch it. So, yeah, Freya, hi. Lovely. Okay, I have Freya. That's quite enough for me. All right. Let's not make this super long. So I'll just start. So, my name is Ada, and I'm a data journalist. And I have recently started a project that I call the Data Frosh. It's called the Data Frosh because I live in a German-speaking country, and Data Frog was already taken by a company that makes game controllers. So in the Data Frosh, I make tutorials and courses and mentoring concerning data analysis, programming, visualization, and so forth. And and I also like doing YouTube videos and doing these YouTube live things. So, and this one will be about what form to use for our data. So I hope that we're going to not only ask questions, but also get some answers. Okay, so if you have questions at any time, I can see the chat. And yeah, please ask questions. Otherwise, I'll just run through. Okay, so what form to use for my data? I would like to start with introducing a person, which is Florence Nightingale. You might have heard of her already. She's pretty famous for a particular chart that she made. She was a nurse at military hospitals. Also, she was also a nurse back in the United Kingdom, and she was nursing soldiers that fought in the Crimean War. This was in the 1850s, and not the recent Crimean War. So, war is a place of, you can wear, a place where you can wear nice uniforms and silly hats, and you can, scare your opponents with the crazy bagpipes. These are, by the way, real pictures from the Crimean War. But there are also pretty gruesome things happening. You can use limbs or you can die. And what Florence saw, actually, during her time in Crimean War, that the soldiers did not die as much from casualties, from wounds. They didn't die as much from wounds or other battle-related reasons, but they died because of preventable disease. And this is her most famous chart. This is actually also called the Nightingale Rose. Somewhere it is also sunburst chart, and she didn't invent it, but she made it very famous. So, and on this graphic, we can see how the death from preventable diseases goes down when you introduce some forms of hygiene and, you know, you don't cram everybody in the same space. But was this the best form for this data, right? This she chose wisely, because actually what we know from modern research into how we look on graphics, then doing anything in a circle is pretty tricky for us to understand, because we are not very good in interpreting the angles. So this is why also pie charts get lots of hate, right? Because they are being misused, because it's very difficult to read. And another thing that she did here, what I don't know why she did it like that, is that she, if you look well on the like the left chart is later than the right chart. So the left chart is from 1855 to 1856, but the right chart is from 54 to 55, so the timeline is swapped, right? You would expect something that happens first to be on your left, and then something that happens later to be on your right, but this is not what she did, and I don't know why. And there also, this is, I got this image from somebody else, I didn't do it, but there also is a better forms to communicate this data. For example, preventable diseases being like on the top part of your axis, and the depths from non-disease cause from the bottom, and then drawing an average, you know, putting some annotations in there. This is one made by the data wrapper people, which is also just a bar chart that shows us pretty well, it communicates pretty well with what Florence was trying to tell us as well. I will, by the way, put all the links are on the end of the presentation, and I will share the presentation link with you as soon as I'm done here, so you'll have that. So what actually makes a right form for our data, right? What is it? So let's take this data set, right? This is average sunshine hours per month and for Amsterdam. Okay, if I look at this data set, I see, okay, I have the months and I have a place with some numbers in there. For me, time is line charts, right? So I plotted on a line chart. But if I look at it, I'm thinking, yeah, it can also be a bar chart. Like, does that really matter? I don't know. Okay, let's say I add Vienna to this, you know, make it a bit more interesting. Maybe I'd like to draw some comparison here, you know? And this bar chart looks quite good. We see that Vienna gets more sunshine hours than Amsterdam. But what about this one? This shows us way better that Vienna gets more sunshine hours than Amsterdam. It's way more obvious. There's too much happening here, right? Well, here it's just one line. It's clear. We see that. I see that very clearly. What is also important is to make that obvious. You know, like now, if I put here Vienna is sunnier than Amsterdam, it gives me a hint, like, oh yeah, I have a story there. I visualize this in a way that it's clear and there's a story to tell. So that's kind of my nudges that, oh yeah, I probably have quite a good form for my data. What about this one? Okay, we have the sunshine hours for different continents, right? What is a good form for this data? Is it also a line chart? Well, I don't know. It really depends, I guess, on what you want to say. So one trend that I see here is that Europe is pretty gloomy. So if I want to highlight that, this is quite a good one. But again, if if that is my story, do I need to show all the data? Like, isn't this also a perfectly good chart to tell the same story? So what I'm trying to do here is to give you a little bit of an impression of how one goes about in choosing the right form. Because you move from data to visualization to forming a story, back to the data, maybe changing the visualization and so forth. It's not always a linear process. Sometimes it takes time. But I'll get back to that later and show you some tools on how to brainstorm with yourself. So what to consider when choosing the right form for the data. So first thing to consider is what is the structure of my data, as we saw before, like we have the time, we have the values. And the second one is what is the story that I'm trying to tell, right? So those are the two parts that are going to help us show a form, help us choose a form. So the first part, understanding your data. So there are two things that we need to pay attention when understanding our data. Of course, we need to analyze it as well. But for that, I'm going not to talk about that because that's a whole topic on itself. But also for analysis, we need to know the types of data. So we have categorical, numerical, time series, text, because this will have an effect on what kind of form we actually can choose. So let's go back to this data set, the average sunshine hours in Amsterdam. Very sad story, by the way. This data set has two variables. One of them is time, another of them is numerical. Easy. If you look at the data set when we add Vienna, here we have three different variables, which is the time, which is the numerical, and which are the categories. So these are our data types. And if we take yet another data set, and this one is job offerings in AI, in I think a quarter year, scraped from different sources. Here we can see that we have the time, and we have some text, and we have some category, we have numerical, we have geospatial or categorical, depends. So first we need to look at our data set in this way, right? Like, okay, what is actually in there in terms of data types? And the second thing we need to pay attention to is the number of variables. And where this data set has two variables, right? We saw it. One of them is time series, another one of them is numerical. This data set has how many dimensions does this data have, you think? I'll just if people watching can put a guess in the chat, and I'll just leave 30 seconds for you to think about. If this data set has two dimensions, how many dimensions, how many variables do we have in this data set? So I got fooled by myself here because I originally thought 7. I originally thought 8. But actually it's just 3 because these are our variables. All right, this is our dimensions. And another way how to represent this data set to show you that I am not lying is actually this one. So this is tidy data. Also something I'm not gonna get into right now, but this clearly shows that this data has 3 dimensions. And why is this important, right? Why am I now confusing you with talking about dimensions in data? That's because this really matters in what in the choice of your data visualization, because, for example, this line chart can only visualize 3 dimensions. One of them is the sunshine hours, the other one is the timeline, and the third one you can represent with the color. Well, actually, the lines are a third one, and the color is a fifth one, a fourth one. So you can represent 4. 4, because the lines themselves are 1. Okay, so you can represent 4 dimensions. So also when you choose to visualize data, you need to reduce the amount of dimensions first, and then put it in a chart. You can use charts that can visualize more dimensions. For example, this is the very famous Gapminder chart, where we don't only plot the life expectancy and the GDP per capita on the X and the Y axis, but we also plot the size of the ball, the size of the circle is the population. So then we have the color of the ball, which is the continent. So there's already 4 dimensions. And then he added a 5th dimension, which is time, right? So, but that's actually really, I think, the maximum you can go. I wouldn't go further than that. So, and also data that look quite complex and that can be visualized quite complex still can have not that many dimensions, right? So in here we have health-related behaviors among high school students. This is from the New York Times. And we see here that we have the element of time, which is the axis on the bottom. Then we have the percentage on the vertical axis, and sometimes we have the distinction male and female. So that is our 3, and then we have the questions themselves, which is 4, and then the actual value of how many people answered yes or no, or have I ever tried to, considered suicide or not. So that's a yes or no questions. So even in charts like this, you don't really have to have many dimensions, but you can play with it. All right. The second part is finding your story. And what I mean by finding my story, it's something I already showed you at the beginning. So we have different story types, and there is not really a consensus on how many are there, because this is 7 common angles for data stories according to Paul Bradshaw. So we have a scale, we have change, ranking, variation, exploration, relationships. But according to the Tableau people, we have zoom and drill and intersections and factors, and they share the change over time, so outliers, but otherwise I think contrast maybe as well. But so there are different approaches to how to find a story. As I said, I linked everything in the presentation, so you can read about it yourself if you like. I'm not going to go into it very deeply. But this is an example for scale. So, this is how big of a problem is. And then, generally when lines go up, that means problem is big. Ranking and outliers, who's the best, who's the worst, what's unusual, right? So this particular example is about countries listening to happier music than others. Brazil, super happy, United States, less. So these are comparisons, and we already did that before, right? So at the beginning, when we visualized the average sun hours, this is not really a data visualization I would publish anywhere, because it doesn't tell me what the story is. The only thing that I would change here is, again, the headline, Vienna is sunnier than Amsterdam, then I have a story. This is the same thing, right? Like, if I only say average sunshine hours per continent, I don't know if this is a good visualization, because it doesn't tell me a story. And what I already see is that it uses too much colors. It doesn't really give me a clear takeaway. Well, if I say Europe is the gloomiest continent, and then I go for that's what I want to highlight, right? In the same chart, on the same data, you can have multiple stories. Africa is the sunniest continent, right? It really just depends what you focus on. And again, the first story can also be told in a different format. It doesn't necessarily have to be the line chart. It can also be a bar chart. Okay, now imagine you know your data, you found your story. What now? Okay, if there is one tool I want to leave you with after we're done here, and that's the visual vocabulary from the Financial Times. This is a magnificent poster because it will show you all the usual and unusual charts that are used in the news, at least. And it will explain to you in what situations do we use it. And it also gives you alternatives. So, for example, if we want to see something is different, the deviation. So, let's say the data set from Nightingale about deaths from preventable diseases put against deaths from wounds. That's all the deviation, right? They kind of oppose each other, and you can also, this is the type of data that you also get from surveys. I strongly agree, I strongly disagree, right? So there we have the diverging bar, but we can also have the diverging stacked bar, or a spine, or a surplus deficit fill line. So what happens when I design a chart, I don't even necessarily consciously think of these categories. I just know by now, but these are very helpful. And if I start with, okay, I want to show a change over time, right? I shown a line. Okay, that's the chart I chose. But perhaps I could choose also column, right? That's what we did at the beginning with Amsterdam. Is it a line? Is it column? But you can also go crazy, right? You can choose a slope graph. So slope graph would give you show only 2 data points, the beginning and the end. Sometimes you don't need the whole line in between. You can have a heat map, also great. You can have a Priestley timeline. You can have circle timelines. You can experiment and go crazy with this tool. What I really love about it is that it's very simple. It's not really an app, or it's not really interactive. It's basically just a very good big poster that I would love to have printed out as well. So for example, parts to whole, if you use pie charts, pie charts are often not the very good way, because it's difficult to accurately compare the size of segments. What I use for parts to whole is more often tree maps, because they are way better. They're way better suitable. They're way easily readable. So this is the tool. Again, I will link to it at the end. And I have planned to do as well a little demo of how I do it, because I can talk about it, but hey, how it actually looks like. So as I showed you before, that little data set with AI jobs. So this is a global AI job market and salary trends data set, and I have downloaded it here. And I have already, so you remember we were talking about all these different dimensions that I need to get rid of in order to tell a story, or in order to put it on a data visualization. So I have the posting date, I have some the salary and the company location and where the employee will live, and remote, if it can be remote 100% or 50%, what kind of education is required, what kind of industry, and the benefits score and the company name. So I made a little pivot table here with the max, median, and minimal of salary that you will get for various jobs. And I'll make this a tiny bit bigger so you can see. And okay, so the company size, if it's small, the median salary is also smaller than the large ones. It's not a very groundbreaking finding, this one, but it's easy enough, to consider. So this is the minimum salary that you get, and that one is not that far apart as this one anymore. So if you live in a small, if you would work in a small company, this is just a $10,000 difference. While if you look, the maximum salaries you can get are like humongous, at 400,000 euros. So I would maybe like to, what if I take away this median, and let's say that I want to visualize the difference between minimum and maximum salary, right? So how would I go about that? Now this is my data set, and I'm going to use Flourish for this. You can use anything else. You can use also your Excel, doesn't really matter. And so I'm gonna revisit my chart doctor, and I want to show basically the difference between those two, like how far they are apart, and that would be ranking, I think. So let's see if I can make a slope graph here. I think that could be interesting. So let me go back to this, and I can make slope graphs with line charts. And I'll remove this. And I paste it in here. Okay. All right, this is not how I want it to look like, so I will turn it around. Oh yeah, this needs time, but that's fine. And I will just say that the first one is time. Okay. This is my slope graph. Well, basically, it shows me that if you're the max salary, now that I look at it, I'm thinking, this is not really it, right? I mean, it kind of shows me that the differences are bigger here than here, but it doesn't really look good. So I am going to look at, maybe I can do a grouped bar chart. This is already a bit more obvious that the differences are way bigger up here than here, because it's just visually more obvious. You can see the gaps basically way better. So if I'd say, what is my story? AI jobs in small companies, or in maximum salary in AI jobs varies more than the minimal across company size. Okay, it is not, I admit this is not the most exciting story to begin with, but this would be kind of my process to go about it. So look at the data first, see what I can get out of it. Like what I could also do here very quickly is to see what industry pays the most. So instead of the company size, I would put in here the industry. Oh, industry. And what is the average salary across industry? And what you see here is that the salaries are kind of comparable, which could be also interesting, you know, like there is no variation in this data. And I would visualize this probably as a bar chart if I had to, or I would just find a different story because it's, again, not the most exciting one. All right, so that was my little demo. Now, so what about Florence? If you remember, we ended up with questioning whether her choices were the right choices when visualizing the dataset. So, were they? Well, I think in the end, they were actually really good. Like, for their time, they did a marvelous job in creating visualizations that are pretty, that are beautiful to look at, that are accessible to people, and that they could read it, because what they used them for was actually a propaganda to reform the sanitary conditions of the army. So the diagrams, once Nightingale's team published them, they would be covered by the press, and within months the reform of the sanitary conditions of the army has been set into movement. So I would argue that her choices were good, because every time we make a graphic, we want to inform, we want to bring clarity into data that just show us everything, right? And we pick out one insight and we visualize it. And if that insight comes across and is understood by our audience, then it's a good form for the data. So I would also recommend to everybody, if you're doing this work and maybe you are starting out, or maybe you're unsure, or maybe you're even very sure with what you're doing, have somebody else look at it. You know, ask your mom, you know, the default mom thing. Do you understand it? Is this clear? Because in the end, that's the most important way of checking, or the most important, or the most easy and foolproof way of checking whether the form that you chose for your data was the correct one. So here are some resources about Florence, about Crimean War, the charts that I showed, and the data that I used, and the story types you can read upon, and the visual vocabulary. I also have a newsletter that you can sign up for if you like. And I would very much like to thank you for being here with me. And if you have any questions in the chat right now, please ask. Thank you. Well, if there are no questions, then I thank you for being here with me today. And I will be looking forward to maybe seeing you next time. And Freya, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. If you have any feedback, you know how to reach me. And otherwise, have a lovely rest of the day. Bye.